Hello everybody and welcome to Every Movie Ever. I'm your host Eric and this is the show where we are reviewing every movie ever made. Now today we've got a special treat for you. We're going to do things a little differently than normal. Longtime viewers of the show will know how we do things. We usually review, 8 or 9 movies. We have little segments that we do to introduce each movie, and I offer up scintillating, fascinating reviews of each and every movie. Very in-depth and exciting. Today, though, here's the thing. We're watching every movie ever made, and sometimes I watch a movie that I just don't have that much to say about, and then those movies end up in a pile just waiting to be reviewed. Well, today we're going to work on that pile. I'm going to review as many movies as we can in the length of this show. These are going to be shorter reviews because these are movies that I do not have a lot to say about. We're not going to go into the usual segments today. We're just going to do movie. And we're going to start today with Jumanji. This is the movie based on the book about a made-up game where when you play the game, jungle stuff starts to happen in real life. This is the one from when I was a kid. Stars Robin Williams as a kid who had gotten sucked into the board game, years later gets spit out and goes on an adventure with a bunch of kids. I remember liking this movie well enough when I was a kid. I remember that my dad was very upset that you could not go into your local Target and buy a very high-quality reproduction of the Jumanji game. He was very disappointed with the standard issue board game that came out for it. Revisiting it now, I was kind of like, yeah, I mean, it's all right. The computer graphics, computer-generated, special effects have not aged particularly well. The story doesn't make a ton of sense. The sort of wraparounds involving Robin Williams as a boy and then the epilogue kind of don't make a lot of sense. The thing that I was most surprised by watching this movie recently was that Kirsten Dunst is in it, like as one of the children. This is when she was a young girl, and I didn't realize Kirsten Dunst's career stretched back that far, and she's very good in it. Everybody's fine. It's always a little bit weird when you see these movies where they kind of have Robin Williams' essay sort of an action movie role, but it's fine. It's a 3-star movie. I checked out, for the first time ever, I watched Mr. Mom, the Michael Keaton comedy, I guess blockbuster. It was very successful. This is the one where Michael Keaton's wife, who is played by the always entertaining Terry Garr, she gets a job, and so he needs to stay home and takes care of the kids. Terry Garr is very good in this, but she ultimately gets very short shrift. This is Keaton's movie, and it's somewhat funny, but it hasn't aged well. Ultimately, it feels a bit misogynist, ultimately because Michael Keaton never quite gets the hang of being Mr. Mom, right? The whole idea of the movie is that he's a fish out of water, and so you expect him to eventually take things over with pride, and that never really happens. It tends to be a movie with a lot of complaining about how he doesn't get to be the breadwinner, and so that, that's a bit of a tin note for me. The grocery store shopping sequence, pretty funny, and the scenes where he's like playing cards with the other moms is pretty funny. Again, okay movie, doesn't age great, 2.5 stars. Primo Baby is a Canadian movie about a girl who has a rough, life, has fallen into a little bit of a life of crime, gets adopted, I guess, and moved to a horse farm. She falls in love with a horse. We reviewed this movie for my movie Bad Movie Brothers, or my show Bad Movie Brothers that I do with my little brother Chad, where we watch a bad movie and talk about it. So you can go see a really long and in-depth review of Primo Baby there. Here, what I will say about it is that, God help me, I kind of loved it. I loved that horse. I love that horse. I love that horse's friend. And the end of this movie did make me cry. Still, not a very good movie. Primo Baby, 2.5 stars. What can one say about the live-action Beauty and the Beast? As it turns out, not a whole heck of a lot. Now, I guess I overall think that the Disney trend of doing live action versions of their animated films is kind of stupid, and that for the most part they haven't yielded particularly exciting results. That said, I did really like Cinderella. I liked it a lot. And those movies where they sort of take the animated film as a starting point and try to do more with it, maybe expand on the animated movie, fill in blanks, that kind of thing. Do something that's essentially, that starts out from a similar idea and then becomes something different. That's somewhat exciting. Beauty and the Beast, however, is the other direction, where they almost scene for scene just redo the animated classic as a live action version. Now that animated classic, we revisited it recently, really holds up still terrific. This just feels like a hollow redo that doesn't have any particular point for being. There's nothing here really that I can recommend for you to watch. Even the usually terrific Stanley Tucci is just sort of there. The guy who plays the Beast is that guy from Downton Abbey. I think Dan Stevens is his name. He's usually great. He's, fine. Again, it's a movie that's, I guess, fine, but why would you watch it when the animated classic is there? Live action Beauty and the Beast, 2.5 stars. Ghost World is the film directed by Terry Zwigoff that follows Thora Birch as in sort of a coming of age sort of thing, as she is a malcontent high school student who befriends Steve Buscemi, who's a sad sack loser, and it's difficult to tell if she's befriending him genuinely or, because she kind of wants to make fun of him, and if that friendship then evolves from sarcasm to genuine. The film co-stars Scarlett Johansson in one of her early film roles. Listen, everybody, Buscemi, Birch, Johansson, they're all terrific in this. It's a fine little movie that I think because Birch's character is so acidic, never quite finds its way. Now that said, I'm not saying that this should become a saccharine film, but it's a movie that ultimately, I liked it a lot in college. When I was a sarcastic 20-something with a chip on my shoulder, this movie seemed like a movie. Now you look back at it and you're just like, the movie so well embodies that attitude that once you've grown past it and you look back on that portion of your life like, what was I thinking? You look at this movie and you're also kind of like, what's the deal? So, good, like a lot of the movies today, good, but 3 stars. Snatched is the recent comedy that teams up Amy Schumer and Goldie Hawn as they are almost kidnapped in South America and they try to get away. They're playing mother and daughter here. Listen, here at Every Movie Ever, we love Goldie Hawn. And we think Amy Schumer is a terrific talent. We really enjoyed Trainwreck. And we think that she's very talented, but man, they don't seem to know what movies to put her in. Snatch is a great example of this. This could have been something, but ultimately it's just very uninspired. The sort of darkly comedic notes that it could pursue never wind up anywhere. Ultimately, the reason to watch this is not for Hawn and Schumer, but rather for the secondary couple in this movie, played by Wanda Sykes and the lady from Roseanne, where they are ex-military or something like that, and they have these semi-bumbling but also semi-competent attempts to rescue Hawn and Schumer. Listen, it's not great. It's a misfire, and unfortunately not because they swung hard. It's a misfire because the people behind the camera didn't seem to care all that much. Snatched, that's 2 stars. You don't know Jack? This is the movie where Al Pacino, plays Jack Kevorkian. Here's the deal. It was interesting to watch this movie from a point of view of, I remember the Dr. Kevorkian stuff going on when I was younger, but I didn't know a lot of the details of it. So it was interesting to watch this movie and pick up on those details. This is also some really great Pacinoing. Pacino's been doing a lot of these HBO movies, and this is a much more subtle and interesting performance than a Pacino is wont to give in, like, say, a Scent of a Woman, or what we think of Pacino nowadays. That said, the movie is still ultimately only so interesting. I only care so much about what's going on in it. You don't know Jack, that's 3 stars. Over at the Netflix, they had a new Netflix original movie, which, let's be honest, these Netflix original movies are often a little bit hit and miss. This one, A Futile and Stupid Gesture, set out to tell the story of the founding of Mad Magazine. It stars Will Forte as the guy that wrote and founded Mad Magazine. The cast is tremendous. As his sort of co-founder and cohort, partner in crime, you've got Domhnall Gleeson. You've got Martin Mull in a really terrifically interesting idea for the movie, where Martin Mull is playing Forte's character all grown up. Well, all grown up's a little silly, as an older man. If you're familiar with National Lampoon Magazine and with these people, then you know that Forte's character committed suicide or died falling off a cliff, however you want to look at that, in the 80s. So it's an interesting idea to have Mull play the old man he never got to be in sort of narration sequences. Thomas Lennon plays Michael O'Donoghue in a pretty inspired casting choice, the sort of rogue Saturday Night Live writer. Joel McHale plays Chevy Chase. In a pretty good fit, especially when you consider McHale and Chase's time working together on Community. The whole thing's directed by David Wayne, ex of The State, a very dependable comedy director whose output tends to range from the fine to the inspired. This tends to be a bit more in the fine category, 3.5 stars. Now, I'm always up for a movie that is, generally speaking, a for regular movie that has one fantastical element in it, and I particularly like ones where the main character somehow becomes immortal, because I'm going to reveal something about myself to you folks at home. I'd like to live forever. That sounds like a good time to me. Even though I keep watching these movies where that turns out to be a depressing thing, I still want to go for it. Which brings us to Age of Adaline. This is the movie where a young woman, gets electrocuted and ends up immortal. It's largely a romance movie, and the romance is, it's a fair romance. The ending of it is real stupid. And, in between, it's a movie that never rises above, sort of mildly interesting. I had this movie on in the background while I was doing some paperwork, and it was a perfectly adequate movie for that never got me too excited. Age of Adaline, 2.5 stars. So you guys know that fella Clint Eastwood. Not just an actor, a director. And he's a director who's made some very good movies, and a director who's made some really bad movies, and he's made some a lot, primarily, middle-of-the-road movies. Spoiler alert, this is one of those. I'm talking about Sully. You see, this is the one about the guy who Captain Sullenberger, who landed the plane in the Hudson after an engine went out. Clint Eastwood has become fascinated lately with modern heroes, and he sort of rushes out movies that in an earlier age would be sort of TV network movies of the week about these guys. So whether that's Captain Sullenberger or those guys on the train in Paris, this seems to be what Clint Eastwood, it's his raison d'etre right now. This is an interesting story. Tom Hanks stars as Captain Sullenberger, and Hanks is typically great. The problem here is that partially because this was such a recent event, there's just not enough movie here for 90 minutes. There's a lot of time spent, on the commission investigating into whether Sully should have done what he'd done. Should he have landed the plane in the Hudson and not turned it around and gone back to the airport? That is the central question of the movie. The question of the movie isn't the heroic act or, it's did he do the right thing? And the movie spends a lot of time with the commission investigating that and with Sully's own introspection about if he should have done what he did. And the movie, it's so pressed for being feature length that we relive the flight, that all-important flight. We relive it 3 times in this movie, which is a bit much. Now listen, especially that first sequence where we watch Tom Hanks have to put that plane down in the river, it's very exhilarating and exciting. But by the end of the movie, when we've seen it 2 more times, it's like, guys, it makes me long for those old Hollywood days where they would put out a movie that was only like 70 minutes. And a lot of times those movies, that's all you needed, man, and that's a good movie. This is an okay movie with an extra 20 minutes, which makes it about a 3-star movie. Do any of you guys remember that movie, Small Soldiers? This came out, I don't know, late 90s, early 2000s, directed by Joe Dante. Now, Dante is a great, and part of the reason he got to that status was for Gremlins. And Small Soldiers is just doing Gremlins over again, except instead of an adorable Mogwai and the creepy evil Gremlins, here what we've got are plastic toys, essentially big G.I. Joes, come to life to fight, their toy enemies, which are these kind of monster-looking dudes. But the twist is that the monster dudes are the good guys and the G.I. Joes are the bad guys. Now, if you're hearing that twist and thinking, well, that sounds a little trite, it is. This movie is pretty meh. There's some good practical effects work in this that do impress, and then there's some CGI in this that does not. It's a movie that's all over, just a fairly warmed over idea. It's worth about 2.5 stars. Alfred Hitchcock is roundly considered one of the great directors of all time, and that's well deserved. He's produced many classic movies, and Strangers on a Train is one of them. This is a great movie. It's a great Hitchcock movie. This one's about 2 guys who both have somebody in their life that they're at least interested in murdering, kinda, more so one guy than the other, and they happen to meet on a train, and this plot is hatched that they will murder each other's victim, thus providing the other one with an alibi, and then you shouldn't be able to find the dude what did the murdering because they don't know each other outside of there having been strangers on a train. This is a great movie. It's a terrific movie. I loved watching it. I hadn't seen it in a long time. This is high quality Hitchcock. But for whatever reason, I just don't have a lot to say about it. The one thing I'll say is that the lead, our hero, the guy who, after this plan is hatched, is like, I'm not going to murder somebody. That's not a good idea. He's a little milquetoast. He's also in Hitchcock's Rope, and he's just, he's so-so. But that said, the movie itself is still really great. The guy playing the villain, the murdery guy, is really good. And there's a lot of great Hitchcock set pieces on this, particularly the sequence at the carnival and on the carnival island. The whole murder sequence is tremendous. I wish I had more to say about it. I don't, but I'm still going to give Strangers on a Train 4.5 stars. Another movie that I like a lot, but just don't have a ton to tell you guys about, is Pirates of Penzance. This is the 80s adaptation of that great Gilbert and Sullivan musical. Where the movie falters is that it does feel a little stagey. There are times when it feels like you're watching a filmed stage production, a very well-produced stage production, but it's never terribly cinematic. The cast is tremendous. Linda Ronstadt is in this. This is the Linda Ronstadt one. She's really great. She sings great. She acts terrific. Really enjoy her in this. I mean, it's not a super demanding part. The characters in this movie are somewhat broadly drawn and thin, but Ronstadt brings that star quality here, as does Kevin Kline, knocking it out of the park. This is how you play baseball, right? One-handed? Maybe I'm tennising it. He knocked it out of the park in tennis. Who cares? Listen. Kevin Kline is terrific as the Pirate King. He is playing this one to the rafters, a very exaggerated performance that is impossible not to love. And then a number of scenes are stolen by the Major General character played here by George Rose, more a Broadway actor than a film actor. but it's hard to imagine a major general that is not this guy. I love this movie. This is a movie I have rewatched a number of times. It is a warm blanket of a movie for me. I know there are other productions of Pirates of Penzance that are, and that this one, you know, I would imagine that Gilbert and Sullivan snobs would look down at the Linda Ronstadt of it all. I love it. Pirates of Penzance, 4 stars. Those of you watching this show on the internet might not realize it, but we produced this sucker in Minnesota. And a very Minnesota thing is the movie Miracle. This is the one about the miracle on ice, wherein the United States team defeated the Russians in the Olympics in the 80s or whatever, won gold. And this was back when the Olympics were serious about that you had to be an amateur athlete. So these are all like college dudes. It's a solid movie, and it's an affecting movie. Kurt Russell plays the lead coach, and he's a total jerk in it. You know, and I suppose that's historically accurate. Part of me, especially because this is a Disney movie, wants this guy to have some sort of a soft side, and he never really does, which sort of keeps me at arm's length from the guy. But also the movie's not going the other way, where it's like, this guy's an irredeemable jerk, and we're going to work with that. You know, I guess we're supposed to look at him as a jerk, but be like, he's an effective jerk, darn it, and get behind him. I don't know. The other problem with this movie is the various hockey players are completely indistinguishable from each other. It does not help that the actors all look pretty much alike, and it does not help that the characters are all sort of thinly drawn. I mean, there's a lot of them, and there are 1 or 2 that they sort of put forward as like the, you know, the lead guy on the team or whatever, but it never quite gels into something where I'm like, this guy is this guy and that guy. They don't even really have that's the sloppy one and that's the funny one. Ultimately, it's, you know, you feel like you're watching kind of a middle-of-the-road documentary, which is why I'm giving Miracle 3 stars. Speaking of sports movies, let's talk about Ladybugs. Yeah, this is that one where Rodney Dangerfield coaches a girls' soccer team and brings in a boy as a ringer. I expected this to be completely dreadful. The truth is that it's not that bad, but still real bad, right? It's full of isms and phobias that are entirely too many to list, as you might expect. It is not a well-handled thing in any way. It is aged very poorly. The only other thing to really say about it is that this movie somewhat inexplicably co-stars Jackie. And Jackie, pretty good in it. She really holds her own against Dangerfield and has a couple of pretty funny scenes. Still, Ladybugs, it's not, listen, this is not a movie that in 2018 anybody should be watching unless you're doing a show where you're trying to watch every movie, which, let me tell you something, some days, not a great idea. Ladybugs, 2 stars. So a few weeks back, one of our best of the bunch movies was Jim and Andy the Great Beyond, a documentary about how Jim Carrey is a real jerk on the set of the movie Man on the Moon, which was the movie where he was playing Andy Kaufman. So I decided, I'm going to revisit Man on the Moon, see how that movie was. I remember liking it, and here's what I can tell you here in 2018. I like it, I guess. It's directed by Milos Forman, who has done much better work. It's a somewhat affecting movie, although Jim Carrey's portrayal of Andy remains somewhat grating. The movie also features the whole cast of Taxi playing themselves as younger people, which is sort of weird, but sort of interesting. I don't know. Listen, it's okay. It's not great. In this day and age, here in 2018, I will tell you what, Man in the Moon, to me, works better as like a DVD extra for Jim and Andy. That movie is great, and then it kind of makes you want to see, so what did this result in? You know, something that's okay, something that's 3 stars. All right, that is going to do it for this episode of Every Movie Ever. Thank you for joining me while we really whittle down our pile of movies that I did not have a ton to say about. We'll be back next time. Thank you for watching as we keep trying to review every movie ever made. And don't forget to visit our website, northmetrotv.com/everymovieever. There, you can watch reviews of every movie we've ever covered here on the show, as well as complete episodes. That's northmetrotv.com/everymovieever.